Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 4 of the virtual stone carving apprenticeship. I'm going to pick up right where we left off on the last video that I just finished. The last bit of it I finished just a couple minutes ago, and so I'm going to tell you, recap a little bit what we did and where we're headed next. We did these mothers on these silicone mold models, silicone molds over these clay maquettes here, and because these are jobs that are already done, gone, paid for, this was just reference material for me. I didn't have to have these as perfect models to point them. I did them as quick and easy as I could as far as the mothers go, and so we had some loss around the edges, which is no real big deal. If you're a sculptor, you can figure that out with your equipment as you're using them. What I'm going to do, we'll cast these here in just a little bit, mix up some new hydrocal, and charge these, and show you how to build some, surrounds or dams. This one I don't even know. I might even, this one with the daffodils, because it wasn't the right depth anyways. We may just leave it like this and just have them raised. I'm going to look at it and see, because once the plaster starts to set up, you can just do a partial niche. You don't have to have the flat frame surround. But once again, these are unique. They're not like a paid job. If I was paid to do a model, I'd do a really thick mother on them because I'm getting paid to do it. When I'm not getting paid to do it, means I'm not getting paid, means I'm spending money to do it instead of getting paid money to do it, and that's the wrong way for money to go in my world. So, but the big benefit that I want to point out, and I wanted to have this is why I want to do honest videos, and I want to show you how things actually happen. I don't want to sugarcoat it and just stop and start all over again and don't tell anybody. Like I suspect some videos on YouTube are done like that. I can't guarantee, but there's an awful lot of stuff that they don't ever publish their failures. They publish all the perfect stuff. I'm going to show you all of it, the good and the bad. Now, when I'm doing stone, I can't have a failure, period. Just doesn't work. You can't do that. So you have to be very careful. For this, you can relax and do your thing. But the great benefit of doing these silicone molds is that if for some reason, when you do it and then you do the mother and you don't have a successful mother, it starts breaking, you can always just take this mother off, leave the rubber on the clay, don't disrupt the rubber. Take this off, do a brand new heavier, thicker mother, whether it's just thicker, whether it's got burlap in it or wood, whatever you do. You can do all that and no harm, no foul. As long as you hadn't pulled the rubber off the clay, because it's really hard to get it to lay back in there really well. So if you don't have to disrupt it, don't. But I'll take this and I'll just go over it with a hammer and break it up a little bit, lift it all out, do a brand new mother. No big deal. It was the time and extra money to spend on this plaster. So, but we'll do that. I want to talk some. I talked about saving, the plaster for using it to mark your stone when you're working for certain jobs. I don't do that. That's the old way to do it. My cousin taught me a better way, and so I'm gonna talk about some tools coming up. Do some other videos on on my regular YouTube stuff that y'all have to watch to learn about them. So I'm not just spending the whole time here talking about it. You need to study on your own and learn how things work. And I'm trying to put the work out there for people that aren't interested in the apprenticeship, but that want to learn about it so they can learn too. So if you're serious, you'll be into all of them. But we're going to talk about what's going to come up after we look at tools and stuff like that. I've got a big project to do with a 6 foot tall stone with a 5'6" angel, life-size angel. It's in high relief. It's going to be about 8 to 10 inches in relief. We're doing it in relief to help economize the job for the customer that needed to, work on the budget a little bit, versus having a life-size full round angel, which is really expensive in stone. So, and what we're gonna do, I'm gonna do a one-to-one model of her face and head, and we'll point that with a pointing machine. And we talked, I mentioned pointing machine to start up. This is the next big stone that I'm expecting. Should be here, whenever it gets here, we're gonna work on it. And so we've got to do a model. I'm gonna do a corrected model. I was gonna do a full life-size clay, but to cast them is a lot of work, and they're expensive to cast in plaster for a one-time thing, and they're a monster to handle because they're heavy. It's hard to make them thin enough and light enough that it's not going to wreck your back or whatever handling it. So I'm going to do a 4-foot. This is a 4-foot piece of plywood that had the 4-foot niche with St. Francis, who's like 3'8" or something like that. He's up on the wall. So we've got a 4-foot piece of plywood here waiting to be used that will be fine for this angel that I've got sketched out on a board right here. I actually traced a life-size model, so we've got a pretty good placement of everything. I'll do a one-to-one portrait face, and then we're gonna do the overall figure at 2/3. And I'm gonna show you how to enlarge it with compasses, in the proper way, not hold it up there and look at it and say, yeah, that's good enough. We're gonna do it the right way. Maybe people know how to do it, and they just don't want to tell you. I don't think a lot of people actually know how to do it. I think they've heard about it, read about it. We're going to do the real thing. We're going to enlarge a figure from 4 foot to 6 foot, swinging the caliper, swinging the compasses. And then we're going to index a one-to-one model onto that and do it with a pointing machine to do the portrait face to make a nice job. So if you think this is just screwing around, hang around, because this is the kind of work nobody's putting on the internet. I'm gonna do it. So, and that job's not a pipe dream. We're waiting on the stone. We ordered it about 7 months ago, and it's supposed to be here in the next 4 or 5 months. We've been waiting quite a while for it with the industry slowdown and stone and everything. We're just kind of waiting. But first we're gonna just mix up more plaster and have some fun. So I've been trying to clean up and make it look good. Get my floor clean. I got to rake the floor and get all this up. Just because you got a dirt floor doesn't mean it's dirty. I got to keep it clean. So, but we'll set all these up and start running plaster, and we'll cast these 4 or 5 jobs here. We'll do a new mother on this, and then after we'll probably do the mother first, let that cure while we're doing these other ones. And then while these other ones are done, we can pull this and we hopefully cast that before we put any of the plaster back. So hang in there. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for checking out the video stuff. And like I said, study my videos because it's hard. There's a lot of information that it took me a long time to learn. And there's a lot of this that the only way that we know this, and when I say we, I mean as granite sculptors, professionals, the few that are left, the only way that we know a lot of this is because we had to study and search every little nook and cranny beyond what we were already doing to learn these things. And some of it is legitimately lost art, can't do it, nobody knows how kind of stuff. And so, we're trying to keep this from dying. But hang in there, check it out, and let's get casting some plaster. I figured as long as we're going to do another mother, I'll show you that you can put more foam in your rubber mold as well, because I like I said before, I did the minimum. And there's a lot of difference between draft, if you do have any draft, with a piece of foam that flexes easy and a piece of rubber that sticks out that's really hard. And that's one of the big problems, especially with small details like the iris and hummingbird I got to do. I'll have to use a lot of foam on all the undercuts and everything because the rubber's nice and flexible when it's thin, but once it gets thicker, it gets hard really quick and it won't release. It'll end up pulling things off. So I went ahead and bent up wire for all of these. the ghost or whatever you want to call it to stick in the back to hang it with. And so that's all ready, and we'll get everything set up and staged and ready to go for tomorrow morning. And it's 4:45 now, so we'll quit for the day, and then we'll give it a shot tomorrow and cast plaster, cast a bunch of models, and do a new mother, and hopefully do that one first so it's got time to cure. And if it seems to be drying off well enough, then we can cast it tomorrow or wait till the next day. I'm actually kind of pleased that these mothers didn't all turn out great, because hopefully this will give me a chance to show people that haven't done a lot of this how to address problems that arise, because problems do arise even when you plan really well, and it can be a real problem. And so you got to have some kind of strategy figured out. Now, as I'm working on this, I don't like cheap Chinese tools, but I love these little Chinese scissors that are good. They'll maintain a really sharp nose, and you can cut. So I've gone through, especially like on this daffodil for the center, and I've relieved it several times and cut the rubber. Anywhere where the rubber is really stiff and hard, or there's a lot of undercut, you just snip it a little bit. You don't cut all the way through the rubber, but you cut enough so that when you pull it, it can release where it will go and to where it's easy. And when you let one or two things go, the rest of it usually won't blow out. So, and more about economy, you can make a point of casting your mothers so they've got feet or they stand really easy. More material, more work. I want to get this done. So what we do, we use them for a lot of stuff. Have a box full of wedges. Just, you take, when I throw away wood, there's nothing you can do with it except burn it or compost it. Take all your little scraps, put it on that saw you bought, and cut them into wedges. They don't have to be perfect, they just need to be wedges. And then you can take and square up a model to be cast. You can level it. If they're not perfectly even, you'll end up having more utility out of them because they'll fit different issues and different problems will be solved with them. So now these you can, if you want to, you can drill and mount them to the table. But these are used for leveling stones, for lifting stones, to wedge belts and straps and slings so they don't run up as you choke them. I've got a box full of wedges, from little bitty wedges to long skinny wedges to wedges that are just whatever size, whatever scrap there is. If it's a busted piece of wood and I can get a wedge out of it, I trim it into wedges and you have a bunch of them and then you use them. So I'm going to go through and set all these up and have them the way I want them, and then we'll work on casting them. But they don't tell you about all this stuff. These are worth their weight in gold, like some other things around here. Show you what I've got ready. I've got my soapy water mixed up, a little bit of dish soap, water, naphtha, just soapy water that I'm going to use to release all these molds. It's just one way to help it come off a little better, a little cleaner. It's more about preserving the mold than the model. I don't like to use Vaseline like some people do, or silicone product, because I'm planning to gesso these to seal them, to keep them a little better long term. And I just think just having plain soapy water on there is less of an inhibitor to the gesso adhering compared to either silicone or a petroleum product. But this is all cleaned off. We'll put a big mother on there first. Show you, the way I would do it if it was a sole job. I'll do a nice thick mother. I've got these done up in a variety of ways to show you what I'm going to do. Now with all these wedges I mentioned, it's real easy to get everything leveled off as well as it needs to be, just with some wedges. You can do it with a sandbag. You can do it with, you know, something with, you know, with rope wrapped up around it. There's all kinds of ways to nest it, but the wedges are just too simple and easy. I'm going to show you a couple options for these mothers that broke around the perimeter. Now, this one where we did rubber all the way out, you can see a witness here to where the actual square part of the niche was. I just went ahead and supported this with some of the wedges laid on their side. You got to think inside out when you're doing this, because these are all deflected away from the face. So if I put material on here, I can screed it off and square it up, and it'll look better. A lot of times you'll think you got to pick it way up like that, and then you've got a deficiency. This will be proud. This way we'll have extra material, and it'll support enough for what we're doing. I went ahead and cut up a little chipboard box and made a frame for this. Now, that's obviously a one-time deal, but it'll work fine. I'll wait till the plaster is pretty stiff before I go down here to start the build, and then we'll just build a little layer on there, and it'll be great. I did take my scissors and I snipped an awful lot of these. You can see here where I cut that to try to make sure they release well, and leveled these up. Worked a little bit on some of the draft here. It's still hanging on because of the twine I ran through there, but at this point it's fine. I mainly wanted something to hold these blocks up, to hold the sides up, because when these sides are long, like this one's short, so it's not bad, but when they're long like this, they droop, and you end up having to support them, and it's real awkward trying to hold those up when you're casting them. So, but I'll get these started, and then we'll make sure to put the ghost in the right way, because you get backwards and upside down and stick it in there and put it in the wrong way with the loop hanging down, and that ain't cool, man. You'll end up screwing up. So get everything staged really well, so once you start running plaster, you can pay attention. Plaster is a very demanding partner to work with. Once you start running it, you mix it, and it'll start to kick and start to cream and then start to thicken, and it'll go from workable to done really quickly if you don't have everything staged and set up the way you need it to be. So get your act together first, and we'll start running some plaster. Now, you can put burlap in a plaster in order to help strengthen it. I've always never been really happy with it. It's hard to get burlap. Sometimes you can find really cheap sacks for coffee and stuff like that that have a fairly open structure that'll saturate well and do well for strengthening a mother, but I still get disappointed with it. And so by using just some giant spool of thread I got at some junk store, I don't know where I got it, you get a lot better saturation, because what happens with burlap in your plaster is that it pretty much creates a weak layer where the plaster doesn't adhere between here and here, and there's fiber in between, and it creates somewhat of a void. And I've always found it will delaminate a little bit. By doing this, I'll sprinkle some plaster on, and I'll kind of pull this up and mix it around in there. And I just have found that if you are gonna add any fiber or filament to your plaster, that this works, I think, better. So I use, this is what I do. And everybody's got their own little recipe for success, but this is what I tend to do. People also ask, thinking about this, people also ask me all the time if I'm a welder because of the hat that I wear. Now, when you cut stone, if you look at the old pictures, especially the Italians, they're all wearing paper hats. They make hats, fold the hat up out of the newspaper. The reason for that is to keep the dust out of your scalp, because the dust really does get old. Carving in South Carolina in the summer when it's 100 degrees and high humidity isn't really the best thing to do in terms of wearing a paper hat. I did that in the kitchen as a chef, and you sweat them right off your head. And and I started wearing a dust mask more often as I get older, and I probably got enough dust in me that it's should have started wearing one earlier, even with suction. But these a good respirator, P100 with the headgear type stuff. This is called a fry hat or a welding hat, and it actually is designed to accommodate the headgear that you wear when you're welding and wearing a welding mask. So this hat works really good. They're expensive, so my wife makes these. We get really tight fabric, and she makes them in 2 layers, and they work really well, and they keep the dust out of your scalp. And it's just a utility hat, and they're easy. If I get plaster on it doing something like this, it's really easy to throw it in the wash with regular laundry and wash it. Because if you've got a mesh type hat, like a regular baseball cap or whatever, they're a lot harder to keep clean. So and then my black hat, I wore a felt hat for years, same reason, no dust. And then my black Big Apple hat is just nice and warm and really comfortable. So, but anyways, time to mix some plaster. After you mix your plaster, and this hydrocal, it's 45 parts water to 100 parts hydrocal, so it's basically a 2-to-1. And I measure everything out ahead of time and try to have another run set up. But you'll mix it, and it'll go from being water to being thick cream. And as you feel it start to thicken up, then it's time to work. Now, we're going to do this mother first. Then these other molds, I'm going to take some of the very wet plaster, and not this batch, but in future batches, and I'll take some of this very wet, creamy plaster and try to get a good register all over, and try to make sure I work in all the little holes and undercuts and all that, so that I don't have big voids. That's one of the other risks when you do a waste mold, is that charging the mold is really critical. You have to really manipulate it. If it's a full round figure that's standing up and you split the mold off without breaking it and evacuate it and everything, you put it back together with either cord, tie it, or with old inner tubes cut up like rubber bands. And for the tall, life-size 4 or 5 foot type castings that some of the sculptors used to do, they used to literally roll them around. They would tumble them to try to make sure they covered everything. And it's to do that with a heavy mold that's got a bunch of more weight in it that is fragile and will break. It's just a lot of risk. So, but see, this is thickening up. This is thickened quite a bit just while I've been talking. So we'll keep working. In just a minute, we'll start putting it on this mother for this Oklahoma. I went ahead and put a little bit of this really wet slip on these, the Dove and the anatomical piece that Bethany did, because I really don't know that I'm going to use this entire bucket just on here. And once it's really thick, it's harder to get a good register. So wanted to get that started. If you don't know your pours, you don't know your buckets, you don't know what you're doing, if you're not doing repeats, it's good to keep notes. It's good to keep notes in general on what you use and what you do and how long things take and how much material a specific job requires. because that will help you gauge your time, your investment, what you've done, and that way you can start working on how you charge for things. Because if you're gonna do this as a professional, and they call you up for a project, and the price you give them today is a lot different than the price you gave them 2 months ago, people aren't gonna be happy. And so you're also not gonna see your growth in terms of being a sculptor. If you keep track of your time to where you know exactly how long it takes you to do a typical bas-relief of a certain size or whatever else, how long you to do a model, you can start charging in a consistent manner. And you'll also see your growth as you accomplish those tasks faster. And you'll go from where a task may take 2 weeks to where it takes 2 or 3 days. And there's certain standard jobs in the industry that I do, typical bas-reliefs with standard items, that may spec out to be a certain dimension. And if I figure it takes me a week per foot per figure for a bas-relief, and it typically is 1 to 2 weeks per foot per figure, depending on how complicated it is or how deep it is. I'll find out that some of those jobs I can do them in, 2 or 3 days, or at least the people that are the masters can. And so it doesn't matter if it takes me 2 weeks to cut it. I can only quote it for 3 days. And so, because that's the reality of what it sells for on the open market. And so, by keeping good notes, which I learned in the kitchen for production schedules, I can have a very accurate pricing structure. And so people can call me up and they can get consistent prices. Now, they can't price work for me because one small detail can make all the difference between an easy to do project and one that's a lot more complicated. Now, before this goes off completely, I've got to mix up my next batch to keep me running. But because this is all one bucket, it's not as big a deal. But previously, where this was maybe a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, especially at the transition from the face of the niche, the edge of the niche, face of the die, down into the actual niche or alcove, now it's over 1 inch, closer to 2 inches thick. That's a rugged piece right there. But you have to get into a schedule of washing your bucket, prepping the next batch, having everything measured out and weighed. And plaster's a jealous lover. It doesn't suffer anybody else. It doesn't tolerate them. So there we go, good mother. We may top it up just a little bit more, but let's rinse the bucket and keep going. Got a nice thick mother. That was a little more than 1 bucket, which is a 2-gallon bucket, which is 1 gallon of water and 2 gallons of hydrocal. And then these, the Dove, the anatomical, and the daffodils are approximately 1 more bucket, just a little more than a bucket. But they used about a bucket. And then the 2 flanking irises each used that was about 1 bucket for these. So it's 1, 2, 3 buckets of plaster. So 3 2-gallon buckets, 1 gallon of water, 2 gallons of plaster. The ghosts are in there. They're where they are, they'll work just fine. All they gotta do is hang it up. And so we'll let these sit here and heat out, cook out, cure really well. Then we're going to see if you can tell that I had mother failures on these 2 or 3, because they're going to look great. Wait and see. We'll see if they, I'm more worried about the rubber coming off the flowers and not breaking them than I'm about anything else. So we'll come back a little bit and check them out. See, that mother came off with no problem. So now I can lift this off. On to the next one. Okay, this obviously is just the mother, but you can see the model's largely intact. There's the dove, the face, the daffodils. Here's the 2 sprays of tulips. Now I unmolded this before they cured completely, because if there was a problem, like if I lost the end of a flower or like something, especially on the daffodils, I was concerned about losing a petal. And I tried to reinforce them properly. But if it was a little bit green moist, sometimes you can still slip it and get it to grab. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around this. I'm going to scrape this all up, scrape that all up, and chew it up. And just do it by hand, and they'll look great. So, what's this? Before I clean up these models, dress them all up, went ahead and pulled the surround off of the clay, because I'm done with the clay on the Ekahomo. Made a quick frame for here, and I'm going to go ahead and cast it so I can hopefully be done today with plastering. Put everything up, and then we can start on the next video and have something else to discuss. So we get this worked up, and all I've got to do is clean these up and then gesso them, and we'll be able to wrap this whole stage of the program up. Okay, I started this. See if we can get where the light's okay. I started working on the dove. I started on the thin side, using just a Sureform little rasp, one of these fancy studio tools we bought out of somebody's studio. And I'll work this down, and then the thicker side, I'll work that down afterwards. We'll square it all up, and then we'll trim it off and make it straight. Okay, that Ekahomo came out pretty good, and the mother almost fell off because everything was done the way you do it if you were really trying to spend money. So turned out really well. The only thing, put the ghost in wrong, so it'll hang up sideways. So I'll have to put another piece of wire at the top. And I found out that liquid nails for masonry actually glues plaster pretty well. So we'll work it up. I'm not too worried about it. And there's the dove. Now, I made it into an oval, which I had thought about doing anyways, because corners break. Round stone, if they're not thick, and like this is pretty thick, but these would be pretty fragile and they'd snap off, and so I just thought I'd go ahead and round it, and it had some short area here and at the top, but that's just about perfectly flat. So I may scrape it a little bit more tomorrow, but a little bit with the rasp here, the old Caselli rasp, a couple knives, and to scrape it smooth, and then a saw to bulk off the big stuff. But if you're going to go cheap, that's cheap, because I spent a little bit of time, trued it all up and fixed it. So you can salvage them. Those mothers weren't an issue. To be honest, this was going to be a lot harder, because it's quitting time. I'm going to go up and make dinner. And if this is going to dry overnight, and that bugger's going to be hard to scrape on tomorrow. So, but we'll get that trued up and keep going. But good day. Pretty happy. They look like they ought to look.